Three times in this week's parashah, the narrator tells us that Jacob loves Rachel. Firstly, when he offers to work for Laban for 7 years for her hand in marriage. Secondly, when we're told that Jacob labored 7 years for Rachel, yet in his love for her they seemed to him but a few days. And thirdly, that he loved Rachel so much more than Leah, the snu'ah, the disfavored or unloved wife. This favoritism, which Jacob seems to have inherited from his parents, causes rivalry between the two sisters, Leah and Rachel, just as Isaac's love for the firstborn and Rebekah's love for the younger twin cause rivalry and jealousy between Esau and Jacob. We can soften the meaning of the word saneh, or snu'ah, with the translation disfavored or unloved or least preferred wife, but it is clear from other contexts of the Hebrew Bible that the word means something stronger than that, to hate. The noun sin'ah refers to hatred of one's enemies, and in the story of Amnon's rape of Tamar, his half-sister in 2 Samuel, it can refer to sexual revulsion. In Deuteronomy, we find the term used within a socio-legal context regarding a woman whose husband divorces her because he finds something obnoxious about her. She becomes the wife of another man who then rejects her, sne'ah, same root, literally hates or feels revulsion for her. Then, on the basis of that, this second husband can divorce her and send her away from his house. Why was Leah unloved in this marriage? Nachmanides, the 13th century Spanish-born biblical commentator, quoting the Midrash, suggests that Leah was hated because she deceived both her sister and Jacob. Even if one were to argue, he says, that she had to obey her father, making the substitute, she should have let Jacob know what was going on rather than pretending to be Rachel all night. That is why Jacob hated her. However, despite Jacob's feelings against her, the Midrash argues that God took pity on her. Jacob, says the Midrash, intended to divorce her for what she had done to her sister, but the Holy One blessed her with children, leading Jacob to think, how could I divorce their mother? Others argue that the word sne'ah, he hated her, is relative to Jacob's love for Rachel. He did not hate her, but she was the less loved of the two. Nevertheless, says Nachmanides, Leah was ashamed of her status in the marriage, expressing with the birth and naming of her first 3 sons her hope that her husband would love her. In the following verses, Rachel's envy of her sister becomes apparent, yet her sadness and anger are directed not towards Leah, but towards her husband, Jacob. Hava livanim ve'im ayin meta anochi, give me children or I shall die. The implication here, says Rashi, is that Jacob should have done what his father Isaac had done by entreating God to give her children, just as Isaac had entreated God to give Rebekah children. But Jacob retorts with anger, am I in place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? This is a cruel answer, implying that he's not like his father, who had no children. Jacob already has 4 sons. God has withheld, it's implied, Rachel from bearing children. Ibn Ezra is softer on Jacob. Perhaps, he says, he had in fact prayed, but the time for his prayer to be heeded had not yet arrived. Like Sarah before her, Rachel gives her maid Bilhah to Jacob, and 2 sons are born, Dan and Naphtali. With the birth of this second child to Bilhah, Rachel gives the etymology of his name. And this is what she says: Naftulei Elohim niftalti imachoti, gam yacholti. Naphtali's name is explained in the wordplay of this verse, which is variously translated as, with mighty wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister and have prevailed, or a fateful contest I waged with my sister, yes, and I have prevailed. The Hebrew root of this word naftulei and niftalti is patal, which means to twist or to be tortuous. Patil in Hebrew is a cord or a thread. In Numbers 15:38, that tzitzit, the fringes that are attached to the corner of one's garments, same fringes or tassels that are on our talitot, are threaded with patil techelet, a cord of blue. Rashi understands the word naftulei as referring to Rachel's twisting and turning as she urges God over and over again in her attempt to equal her sister. Onkelos, this is a bit curious to me, connects it with the word hit palel, to pray. I have prayed the kind of prayers that the Holy One appreciates. My prayers have been accepted, and I have been answered like my sister, presumably referring to the birth of Bilhah's 2 biological children, which Rachel considers are her children. But Rashi also quotes Menachem ben Saruk, who explains naftulei as though it were related to the word patil, which means to fasten down or to be closely bound, used in the book of Numbers 19 in that way. If he is correct, then this phrase, Naftulei Elohim niftalti im achoti gam yacholti, could mean something like, I am closely bound with my sister through bonds forged by God to merit bearing children. Rachel may have wrestled with herself in her desire for children and found some fulfillment with the birth of 2 adopted or surrogate children born to Bilhah, but Menachem ben Saruk's interpretation removes completely any sense of war, contest, wrestling, or struggling with her sister. Most obviously, in this one verse, the Torah foreshadows the longer narrative of a wrestling match between Jacob and a mysterious man at the ford of Jabbok, two chapters further on, next week's Torah portion. There, by the way, is a different Hebrew word that's used of that struggling between Esau and the mysterious man. And there the fight is quite clearly a struggle between Jacob, perhaps Esau, an angel, or with God, or perhaps the deepest part of himself, or all of these. If there is a distinct parallel between these 2 sets of sibling rivalries, then we must understand Jacob's wrestler to be his brother. The similarities are apparent. A struggle is followed by a naming, Rachel's naming of Bilhah's second son, and a new name for Jacob as he becomes Israel, as well as the naming of the place of his struggle, Peniel, because, as he says, I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And in both episodes, the Hebrew word yachol is used to mean to prevail. Rachel describes herself as having prevailed, while the mysterious man tells Jacob, "You have striven sarita with God and with human beings, vatuchal, and you have prevailed." So perhaps they are parallel narratives about two sisters and two brothers and the tensions between them. But I am not so sure. I think something else is at play here in the story of Rachel and her sister. Although there is a reconciliation between Esau and Jacob after their wrestling match at the ford of Jabbok, the only time they will encounter each other is when they come to bury their father. They will never after that reside in the same territory, let alone in the same tent. Jacob's estrangement from his family, the losses he endures, are a recurring theme: the death of Rachel, the loss of his son Joseph, his disappointment in his older sons, the violation of his only daughter Dinah. There is a wholeness one discerns, there is a yearning one discerns in Jacob for a wholeness. The fragmentation in his own life leaves him bitter and disconsolate to the end. "Few and evil have been the days of my life," he tells Pharaoh as he nears the end of his years. Jacob finds it hard to accept the realities of his life, the separations and divisions, the lack of unity. But for Rachel and Leah, I think the story is different. Unity is the metaphysical reality that Rachel accepts through her sharing of Jacob with Leah. A commentary to a midrash about Rachel's famous intercession on behalf of the exiles explains that it is Rachel who succeeds in evoking God's compassion for Israel because she recognizes that the paradigm of her marriage with Jacob is a paradigm for a world in which there is division, there is separation. The world does not lend itself to total unity. But what Rachel sees and what she does is to transform struggle, wrestling, and separation into attachment and connection. Tutored in the pain of incompleteness, she suppresses her jealousy for Leah and fastens herself, Patil, to her sister in the phrase with which she names Bilhah's last-born son, Naftulei Elohim niftalti im achoti. Through my inward struggles with God, I attached myself to my sister and prevailed over those negative feelings of jealousy and incompleteness. Now I can name this child Naphtali, the answer to my yearning for life. Rachel's heroism in the book of Genesis is that she accepts through Leah's marriage to Jacob that she lives in a world of division and separation. It grieves her, it makes her jealous, but it also allows her to be altruistic, loving, and generous. Paradoxically, she also represents redemption. It is through Rachel in that famous midrash in which she intercedes on behalf of the Jewish people so that they are forgiven by God and allowed to return to the land from which they have been exiled. Her faith in the forgiving and redeeming nature of God offers us a paradigm for our own lives of personal relationships and faith. Amen.